Okay. Good evening, everyone. Today, we at the Environment and Social Issues Cluster of Nickel and Dimed would be conducting a roundtable discussion on a very crucial and timely topic: the implications, causes, and rescue strategies of the Wayanad landslide disaster. Okay, so let's go back to the 28th and 29th of July when Wayanad witnessed a heavy downpour, receiving almost 572 millimeters of rainfall. This initially triggered a landslide in the Mundakkal village during the early hours of 30th July. What is more shocking here is that this was followed by three more within the span of 3 hours, destroying two other nearby villages. This devastation caused by the landslide killed almost 400 people, with over 150 who are still missing. So, today, as we're on board with our panelists, I would like to start by unfolding what factors, other than the extreme rainfall, could have probably been the cause of these landslides. I'd like to call upon Devyansh. Could you please give us a clearer perspective on this?
Sure. So when we're looking at the factors causing a landslide that's this brutal, heavy rainfall is the obvious answer. And while it has often been cited as the primary cause of these disasters, it's crucial to recognize that the rain alone does not bear all the blame. There are several contributing factors beyond extreme rainfall that have worsened the situation. And that's what has made an event that was supposed to be natural into one that's turned out to be catastrophic. So while the rainfall was undeniably the primary culprit, its impact could have very well been significantly reduced if not for the destructive agricultural and industrial practices prevalent in the area. And the land, which should have been a shield against such disasters, had been weakened and rendered vulnerable by human activity. As for climate change, it has played quite a big role in intensifying these natural calamities. And studies show that climate change has made the heavy rain in Kerala 10% stronger than what it would have been otherwise. This increase in intensity is not just a random occurrence, but it's a direct consequence of the warming planet. If global warming reaches 2 degrees Celsius, we can expect one-day bursts of rain in Kerala to become almost 4% heavier. Alarming statistics like these should serve as a wake-up call to all of us about the dangers of unchecked climate change. But climate change and heavy rainfall are not the only causes as well. Anthropogenic activities, meaning those driven by human beings, have compounded the problem. Thoughtless deforestation, rampant quarrying, and construction of bridges and roads in hazardous and unscientific ways, all of these have contributed to the instability of the land. Wayanad, in particular, has witnessed a 62% reduction in forest cover between 1950 and 2018. This massive loss of trees has weakened the soil's ability to absorb water, which increases the risk of landslides, more of which I'll talk about later. It's also important to note that most landslides in Kerala occur around plantation areas. These areas, once covered by trees that held the topsoil together, have been stripped bare for agricultural purposes. Studies such as the one conducted by the Cochin Institute of Science and Technology highlight how large-scale deforestation for tea plantations has loosened the soil, and this has amplified the probability of landslides. The trees have been replaced by crops with shallow roots, such as tea and coffee, which are incapable of holding the soil in place. When the rains came, these crops and the eroded soil were swept away in the landslides, causing enough force to shatter naturally formed dams and further aggravate the damage. This research points to a clear link between human activities and the increased risk of natural disasters in the region. And to better understand the aggravation of damages due to anthropogenic activities, we can look at the 1984 landslide in Mundakkal, which is also part of the Wayanad district, as Prabhu mentioned. That specific landslide in 1984 was naturally triggered, but it did not spiral into a tragedy as major as the one we're facing today, because back then, the water carrying capacity of the soil had not deteriorated due to anthropogenic activities. But however, there is one more factor to blame. The lack of proper intergovernmental coordination and communication has also played a significant part in the tragedy. The Indian Meteorological Department, IMD, issued an orange warning for Wayanad for heavy rainfall on Thursday, August 15, weeks after the landslides had already claimed well over 230 lives, which started on July 30. This delayed response reflects a broader issue of inadequate disaster preparedness and response, which must be addressed if we are to prevent future catastrophes. To sum it up, while heavy rainfall was undoubtedly a significant factor in the Wayanad landslides, it wasn't the only one. Human actions, whether through deforestation, unscientific construction practices, or inadequate disaster preparedness, all of these have contributed to the severity of the disaster. As we move forward, it is imperative that we learn from these mistakes. We have to recognize the role of human activity in exacerbating natural disasters and take steps to mitigate them. That's all.
All right. So having explored the other possible factors, as you very well mentioned, thank you so much for that. I feel it is also important to dive a little deeper into the understanding of the geographical location of Wayanad, and also in a broader view, the whole of Kerala, which has witnessed a couple of such episodes in the past few years. Meghna, would you like to touch upon that a little bit for our listeners?
Um, yeah, first of all, what Devyan said, it totally makes sense. The heavy rainfall and all. So, building upon that, first, I would like to start that Kerala is situated along the western coast of India, which is primarily the Western Ghats. It's a mountain range. So, basically, the western scarps of these mountains are prone to landslides because of their steep slopes. The way they are look situated, they are like very steep, so they're prone to landslides, right? Another thing which Devyansh again mentioned was this region experiences extremely heavy rainfall. Like it experiences up to 500 centimeters of rainfall, from west to east, or like north to east, pre monsoon showers, every all of them. So basically, this intense and frequent rainfall basically they increase the risk of landslides and flooding. Another thing is the environmental degradation. First of all, it's a hilly area, right? So especially since Kerala is right now, a high has a high population density and it is urbanizing rapidly. It is more vulnerable to impacts of natural disasters, especially because there was extensive deforestation, logging, where a particular part of a forest is cut down, or like sorry, conversing changing turn forested areas into agricultural land, such as tea, coffee, especially it's a hilly area. So expansion of this agriculture, along with infrastructure such as roads, reservoirs, all of them together, it has increased the soil erosion and decreased the slope stability. Considering that it is already a very steep slope, decreasing in slope stability actually makes it more susceptible to landslides. So again, the growth in population around the protected forest areas, especially, it intensified the pressure on the ecosystem there, which actually contributes towards, the wildlife on the other scale. Another thing is the flooding. In 2018, Kerala experienced the worst floods since 1924. All of this is because of unstable slopes and rainfall. So and, almost except for 14 districts, almost all of the districts in Kerala are prone to landslides and flooding. Districts like Wayanad, which we are talking about right now, and Kozhikode, they face deep seated landslides due to their positioning, while Idukki and Kottayam, they are more prone to like shallow landslides. The thing is, at the end of the day, Kerala, by its location, geographical location by itself, is prone to, like, is environmentally vulnerable. But human activities, again, as Devyansh once again said, human activities by themselves increase the chances of such environment, increases the vulnerability of the state towards environmental disasters, such as floods and landslides. So yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for that very insightful overview of the huge role that is played by the geography of the region. I think it would now be a perfect time to move this discussion more towards the phenomena of climate change, which is now also playing a very major role in such extreme weather events. Shaurya, could you please explain what kind of role climate change plays in this whole scenario?
I think that's firstly a very relevant question to ask because, as we all know, climate change is severely exacerbating all these natural disasters. So, I would like to start by quoting a study that was done by the World Weather Association. That's a very accredited association when it comes to meteorological studies that linked that human-led climate change as that is caused by anthropological activities that was very clearly emphasized on by Devyansh. has linked to 10% heavier and more intense rainfalls, especially in Kerala, in Wayanad region. And overall, when we look at the statistics, the rainfalls in Wayanad and in general over Kerala have gotten about 17% more intense over the past 45 years, which can be attributed to the same causes as were listed by Devyansh and Godwarthi, that is the anthropological activities, extreme rainfall, climate change, and the location of Kerala in itself. So when we talk about the location of Wayanad, there was a study done by IIT Madras in 2018 that was where they were tasked with assessing the land accessibility of landslides in India, where they found that overall there was a 34% susceptibility of landslides of the Wayanad region, and they severely recommend, and later following on that study, the Western Ghats Ecological Expert Panel recommended the government to reserve 64% of the area in Wayanad as an ecologically sensitive region and restrain, and maybe even ban activities like quarrying and mining and deforestation that impacted the region and increased its susceptibility to landslides. One more reason that has been attributed to climate change, that is obviously global warming, is because, as again, when we talk about Wayanad's region, it's in Kerala, so it's right adjacent to the Arabian Sea. Over the years, due to global warming, Arabian Sea has been warming up, which has led to increased evaporation rates. So that has caused a lot more humid air and humid environment to be there in the Kerala region. And as we all know, humid environment or humid air has more water retaining capacity. So that can lead to such intense cloudbursts, because cloudbursts like rainfall. Because the thing is, before this year, before 2024, Wayanad did not have an average rainfall of 572 millimeters of rainfall that just transpired there on 30th July. The average was touching 200s and 300. This was far, far exceeding what meteorological departments had even imagined, and why the Kerala government didn't even step up in the first place to mitigate or prevent this disaster. Is because we didn't have advanced meteorological systems and sensitive instruments to alert us of a rainfall like this in the first place. Thirdly, when I talk again about the location of Wayanad, the thing is, the landslide part, even though it has been studied by IIT Madras, the Western Ecological Expert Panel, and a few other meteorological institutes, hasn't been given enough attention, according to me, because the thing is, between 2014 and 2020, all the landslides that transpired in India, that were roughly around 4,000, over 60% of them took place in Kerala. Yet, the quarrying, the mining, deforestation, microcropping, all these things that are deteriorating and disturbing the landscape balance and further exacerbating human-led climate change had not been stopped, had not been restrained in any capacity. Constructions, unplanned constructions were happening, and that in general has led to climate change where it is today. And another study done by the Norwegian Geotechnical Institute has found that one day burst of rain in Kerala will become another 4% heavier if global warming reaches 2 degrees Celsius. And then again, that will exponentially expand the potential of rainbows like these and landslides like these in the future. I would say that's where we're headed.
Thank you so much for that, Sure. I think the numeric data gave us a very clear idea of how much climate change has impacted, and sort of also at times been the start of such horrific tragedies. Moving forward, I would now pass on the discussion to my co-moderator, Tanishi, who would lead it on from here.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. It becomes quite pertinent, in fact, to address issues that very well fall within the human control. Yes, it is very well a congregation of inevitable factors such as incessant rainfall, but the underlying concern behind all of this remains the same. And as the columnist before me rightly pointed out as well, there has been an almost total negligence on part of the authorities to solve this very serious environmental concern. Thus, it becomes very crucial to incorporate long-standing measures to address the same. So moving on, the Wayanad tragedy has unfortunately and very sadly affected the lives of many. Latest reports have showcased villages being completely abandoned to a point where some of them have become uninhabitable. So to elucidate upon this point a bit further, I would like to call upon Aditi, who will take us through some of the horrors of how the Wayanad tragedy affected local communities and some other broader societal implications of the same. So Aditi?
Yes, thank you. So the affected areas such as Mundakai and Choormala, which are remote areas about 50 kilometers from the district headquarters in Kalpetta, um, the people living here, their livelihood activities primarily consist of tea and rubber farming, with farms built on steep slopes. Many of the people killed were working in the farms or were members of their families. The 2021 Kokayar landslide was primarily induced by anthropogenic related agricultural practices, and such lessons need to be implemented on tea and rubber farming, which will need to be controlled and stopped from expansion. This will definitely affect the economic and social stresses of Wayanad's residents. There will be outrage over the loss of livelihood, infrastructure, property, and change in land use patterns, along with increased sensitivity to future warnings. It will also prove difficult for individuals to find alternative occupations as restrictions are implemented over time. There will be a dramatic need for environment focused development in vulnerable areas, lest such incidents occur again. Within land use patterns, there needs to be the conscious expansion of roadways, settlements, farming, etc., that needs to come from the citizens' consciousness rather than just government enforcement. This is their own land and their own homes that are being affected. They should learn and understand the needs and requirements of their habitat, much like sharing indigenous knowledge from tribes to government official works. When people return afterwards from rehabilitation, Mr. Vijayan, who is Kerala's current chief minister, has promised the families would receive 6 lakhs rupees as compensation for the deceased and their dependents, and permanent modern housing in the township as planned by the government. Their timely action would help remedy the affected families and communities from poverty and decrease the risk of waterborne diseases, sanitation, water supply issues by providing critical infrastructure. Nonetheless, the psychological impact and the memory of the landslides will be immense and unforgettable. The Indian Army, the National Disaster Response Force, fire and rescue services, forest and wildlife authorities, the police, along with hundreds of volunteers and government officials who came to the rescue of the locals, will undergo political scrutiny along with the CM, Pinarayi Vijayan. It is important to ask what the outlook will be when it's woven with the loss of livelihoods and family members, if not rage towards the governmental bodies when they fail to inform or adequately warn of evacuation. Moreover, it will depend on the post crisis infrastructure building, such as the construction of slope protecting measures, retaining walls, beast walls, and resilience building, among others. Even the role of the media is crucial for narrative building, creating awareness over high risk causes and factors. They must also take a solution oriented approach from here onwards as eco responsibility to inform and warn the citizens over disasters that can be predicted and widespread devastation be avoided.
Thank you so much, Aditi. It is truly a really very sorry state of affairs. Hopefully, with the rescue operations in place, one can hope that the situation returns to somewhat of a normalcy. But then again, and in fact, the roundtable keeps on circling back to this as well. It is crucial to lay down a structured mechanism, not just to address, but to curtail such disasters from occurring in the future. So, what are some of the measures that are needed to enhance societal resilience to natural disasters? And if I can invite Shaurya to elaborate upon the same.
Oh, right. So I believe that is again a very well asked question because again, with these disasters, we need to learn the lessons we need to learn from them, even though as harshly as we can, and implement them for the better security of the future generations amongst an ever increasing scope and potential for natural disasters. So some of the mitigation measures that can be adopted were, as I discussed previously, an advancement of the technology that is being used for predicting natural disasters. More advanced options should be used as that are being used in Switzerland and Norway that have dedicated a substantiate amount of time and resources for advanced research on early development and prediction softwares, and for them to be installed at regions, and for them to be adjusted according to the parameters and to the geographical limitations of the landscape. Firstly. Secondly, as was mentioned, the post-disaster governance. I would like to credit the NDRF and the SDRF for the brilliantly coordinated rescue operations that they did. We all are aware of the bridge that they constructed in a very short, alarmingly short time, that was 71 hours, that enabled them to rescue 520 people, as were reported by the Hindu on 17th August. Those were the timings of the data. Apart from that, vernacular construction should be encouraged, not just steel or not just brick, construction that provide retaining capacity in terms of natural disasters, that can retain, that have resilience, that will provide resilient based infrastructure, minimizing deforestation and quarrying, reinforcing susceptible slopes, and building retaining structures to protect vulnerable areas in vulnerable area mapping, because we need responsible design and planned architecture and planned activities in the first place to reduce tragedies like with Wayanad that happened to the extent to which they did and caused the amount of lives that which they did. As mentioned before, a huge crowd or a huge chunk of the population that fell victim to the Wayanad tragedy were migrant laborers that used to work in plantations that were initially responsible for causing the damage to the extent that it did in the first place. So better mapping of which area is suited for plantation and which area is suited for residence, and alternative plans and planting programs to replace the native trees that had been cut down for the purpose of agriculture and farming in the first place. Thirdly, effective governance that should actually follow the 10 pointers laid by Prime Minister for the disaster risk reduction. Three of those pointers I would like to point out right now that are mentioned in the National Disaster Management Plan as proposed by the government. So these are pointers 6, 7, and 8. Develop a network of universities to work on disaster related issues. IIT Madras and a lot of expert panels did work on the issues, but their reports were not taken seriously, which caused the issue in the first place. So more expert panels, more studies should be dedicated to such issues so that we can actually learn from them and implement the policies, programs, and technologies invented to mitigate such disasters in the first place. Utilize the opportunities provided by social media and mobile technologies for disaster risk reduction. So right before the last week of July, based on rainfall patterns, there was some speculation that there might be a landslide, not as devastating as the one had occurred, but there was some speculation. And some residents at the risk area, at the vulnerable area, were asked to leave, but they could not leave. Firstly, because they weren't sensitized to the dangers of the place in the first film. They weren't aware of what might happen to them if they continue to work there. And secondly, as I mentioned before, a lot of these people, they are plantation workers, they are migrant plantation workers. They come from a very lower socioeconomic ladder. They don't really have the resources to move on or find employment somewhere else. So better strategies for them, because there hasn't been any consistent shelter available for them throughout the course of this tragedy for them to be reallocated to. Thirdly, when we talk about social inclusion in post-disaster governance, the National Disaster Management Plan has also laid out that each and every house that is built post the disaster, on each and every resource that is dedicated for a family, should be under the names of both the male and the female head occupants. However, since there is no consistent shelter, I'm very doubtful whether that will take place. However, I shall remain hopeful. And lastly, the eighth pointer that was again given by the Prime Minister that I hope follows through would be built on local capacity to enhance disaster risk reduction. Would be again to sensitize the people that are working there, provide with them resources, tell them how to cultivate the land that does not put the slopes at a disadvantage, that does not expose the slope, that does not degrade the slope capacity and the retaining capacity of the structures prevalent within the landscape.
Thank you so much, Shaurya, for your valuable insights. Actually, as the years pass by, one can truly see the wrath of human-induced climate change. At this stage, it is honestly quite surprising if one does not incorporate these measures, considering the alarming rate of natural degradation that is actually taking place. It is, in fact, it is quite likely that in the coming years, one can see an unfortunate case of a Wayanad 2.0 or even a 3.0 for that matter. So in this context, your take on this, Shaurya, becomes quite pertinent. So, as we come to the end of the roundtable, I would like to open the floor to all columnists and, of course, my co-moderator Prabhu. If they would have any concluding remarks or anything that they would like to bring up, please feel free to do so.
Tanishi, I would like to pitch in before we end the
Sure.
discussion.
Sure.
So one thing I would like to add is that before, like a few years prior to this whole disaster, there was also this report, which is commonly known as the Gudgill Committee report, which came out, which suggested that the entire Western Ghats area should be declared as an ecologically sensitive area. So when we say ecologically sensitive, it basically means that construction activities and human intervention must be minimized. And accordingly, they also divided into zones as to how much of construction or human intervention can be taken in that area. So, however, this report did face a lot of backlash from the state. So, here I would like to sort of highlight the importance of finding the right balance between, since we also now know that Wayanad is a very popular tourist destination. So it becomes really important to like sort of find a balance between the amount of tourism and construction while also preserving the natural, uh, you know, the natural serenity of the region, which is also the basic pillar on which sustainable development stands. So yeah, that was something that I sort of wanted to point out. Basically, the importance of how sustainable development should be taken as a community. So yeah, if anyone
Yeah.
else has any other comments or anything that they would like to, sort of put forward for our listeners. Yes, sure.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
please.
Go ahead.
So again, I would just like to dig a bit more on the gravity of the tragedy that went down upon the lives that were lost recently. Roughly 420 approximately body parts were sent for DNA identification, and of them 281 something were found to be of different people. There were schools that were completely demolished where the principal survived and was rescued by the NDRA successfully. And when asked how does he see his life going post disaster and how he hopes to cope with it, his response was, I don't know about that, but the thing that I'm scared the most about right now is that when the school resumes and the children ask me what happened to their friends, how would I answer them? So I believe that a good research is required on mapping the area, and strict implementation should be followed by the government, even though the plantations that are predominantly in the area belong to big corporates that provide that are actually supply the second highest quantity of tea in India. Those activities should be stopped because, again, at the end of the day, climate change remains a very unjust of a phenomena where people who are the most actively involved in exacerbating it are not usually the most that bear its brunt ends. And that is something that has been put to light by the Wayanad disaster for me, at least. And I think that is something that strictly needs to be looked upon and and worked upon accordingly. Because even the development of a early warning system could have really changed the game. Because the government also gave the orange warning very late. That was on 29 July. By then, couldn't anything like there was not much Kerala government could have done as well. And I would like to quote Jayaram, who was a senior research fellow at the Swaminathan Foundation, where he also quoted that this disaster at Wayanad is a man-made tragedy. Because if they had simply followed the recommendations made by several reports and studies before, a lot of people wouldn't have to had faced this very dramatic end to their life where roughly 300 people were just murdered in their sleep, if you think about it.
Absolutely. In fact, this reminds me of another quote, I believe was by a Supreme Court Justice, Justice B.R. Gavai. He had also recently stated something like this. He had said that human greed shouldn't cross a limit where we cease to care for future generations. So your entire take on this is quite insightful. Thank you so much. If anyone else would like to add on, please go ahead. In that case, I would like to thank, of course, my co-moderator Prabhu and all the columnists who shared their insightful comments and enabled such a fruitful discussion today. It has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.